Members, we are quorate. Good morning. I just remind you all to switch off all electronic devices, excluding your tablet device which you're using to view your committee pack. Just a brief overview of today's business. We'll have a briefing from the Commissioner for Older People, reporting on value in an ageing workforce, a briefing from NICVA into their economic analysis of the living wage in Northern Ireland, and a briefing from the Assembly Research and Information Service in regard to self-employment in Northern Ireland. Apologies, I have no apologies at the minute. Anybody aware of any? No? Okay, members, chairperson's business. Just can I advise members that an additional meeting has been arranged for Tuesday the 3rd of February at 12:45, and this is a specific one-item meeting to receive a briefing from the Minister on his budget for 15-16. Members, just also advise members that, as agreed, at a previous meeting, an informal meeting has been arranged with Unite the Union today at 2 p.m. in room 277 to discuss budget cuts to the higher education sector. Members also then tabled at page 3, just advise members that the committee has agreed to visit the Seashell Trust and various other organisations in Manchester as part of its inquiry into post-special educational need provision, and that will be on the 11th and 12th of March. An agenda for the visit has now been drawn up. Members, maybe leave it to any other business, just maybe get a few more members into read names into the minutes of who's going and agree the agenda, if that's okay. Okay, members, draft minutes of our last meeting on the 14th of January is at page 6 of your pack. Members contend this is a true, accurate record of that meeting. Okay, members will sign this as being accurate. Members' matters arising are at page 14 of your pack. Members agreed with the matters arising as listed. Any other matters? Okay, members, thank you. Correspondence then starts at page 18 of the pack and also tabled. Members, just to highlight, page 20 is departmental correspondence providing the committee with an update of work undertaken by the Career Service and higher education opportunities in the Republic of Ireland. Members, this was something we saw clarity on. Any comment or any further content to note? Put your reference if needed. Okay, members, confidential email to members. Advise members that due to its confidential nature, they receive by email or in hard copy correspondence from OFM DFM Committee providing the Northern Ireland Public Service Ombudsman's Bill and the explanatory and financial memorandum. Members, have you anything to raise in regard to how it affects us?
Just it covers the universities now and further education colleges. Before they weren't covered by the Ombudsman, and now they will be with this new bill.
Okay, members content? Members, 3 invitations. Page 31 of the pack is an invitation from Queen's University Belfast to attend the Northern Ireland Science Festival event celebrating science on Queen's University Belfast on Thursday the 19th of February at 5 o'clock to 7:15. Members, if anybody wants to attend, if they can let the staff know. Table at 14 is an invitation from Shonbury Public Affairs to attend an evening with YouGov pollster Peter Kellner. Members, if you want to go, you can pay your own £15. And then tabled at page 16 is an invitation from NICVA to attend this Justice Seminar on Our Voice, developing a charter and policy framework for children affected by imprisonment of a family member. Members, that's on Wednesday the 28th, Parliament Buildings at 12:30.
Same thing as our stakeholders, yeah. Same time.
It's not in the same room, is it?
No.
Okay, members, moving on then. Draft forward work programme is tabled at page, sorry, it's in the packs at page 34. Are members content with the draft forward work programme up until the 8th of April? Just advise members that all the briefings may be scheduled as they arise. Okay, members, moving on then, item 7 on our agenda is our first briefing this morning There's a briefing from the Commissioner for Older People into the report on valuing an ageing workforce. Members, this will be covered by Hansard, and there's a page 39 of your packs.
Good morning, Chairman.
Morning. Can I just welcome Ms Claire Keating, the Commissioner for Older People, and Dr Ben Harris, Policy and Research Officer. Claire, Ben, you are very welcome this morning. So,
thanks very much indeed.
Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, colleagues, all of you. Those of you who haven't seen yet, Happy New Year to you. I've got a nice opportunity today, and I hope it will be one that transforms some of your thinking about older people in the workforce and older people's right to work, as well as older people's right to retire from work. Northern Ireland has a growing older population. More and more older people are living longer and healthier lives, and that really is very good news indeed. The state pension age is increasing over time, and more older people wish to continue to work for a variety of reasons, including financial necessity, as well as the contribution they're still able to make, changing careers, changing jobs, and the pleasure of working and company, and that sense of making a contribution. But there continues to be ageist attitudes, both by employers, a lack of promotion of the contribution of older workers through government policy, and we are missing an opportunity for the economy to grow significantly by the retention, retraining and recruitment of older workers. I want to deal during this presentation with what's called the lump of labour fallacy, the idea that there is a fixed pool of jobs and that somehow if we continue to support older workers or further develop the retention of older workers, it somehow disadvantages younger workers. It doesn't. There isn't a fixed pool of labour, a fixed pool of jobs. We have a shortage of skilled labour. We have a large number of older people who leave the workforce early for a number of reasons, including caring responsibility and ageist attitudes. And if they have a significant and real opportunity to retrain or remain in work, the economy stands the very best chance of growing. This is an economic argument, as well as a rights-based argument for older people. So thank you very much for the invitation to present to you the findings of this report, Valuing an Ageing Workforce. This follows a commitment I made in my first corporate plan, which I called Hope, Confidence and Certainty, to lead a debate among employers and older people about what it is that's needed to support older people either to find or stay in work, and publish and provide information for employers, older people and policymakers on the findings. And it's in that role that I'll be making the comment today. There are so many positive opportunities that are associated with older people having more support to stay in work or obtain work. In Valuing an Ageing Workforce, I outline the economic, the social and the health benefits for Northern Ireland if more older workers have and retain more employment opportunities. Because the truth is that older workers provide a wealth of experience, a wealth of knowledge and commitment, and with strong business incentives to keep their expertise in the workplace. There would be a strong economic, very, very strong economic benefit to Northern Ireland if employment rates among older people were to rise. In fact, if older people's employment rates could increase in line with long-term UK trends, an economic output would be £2.3 billion higher by 2037. So 4.4% higher than if the employment rates of those aged over 65 remained at the 2013 levels. So simply increase the level of proportion of older people who are in work, and the economic output has a significant and real opportunity to grow. The demographics of Northern Ireland, which I'm sure you're familiar with, show quite clearly that older people will continue to make up an increasing proportion of our population. And by 2037, the population aged 15 to 64, which is often regarded or referred to as traditional working age, is set to fall by almost 2% relative to 2013. So our traditional working age population is falling. The population aged over 65 is expected to rise by 75.1%. Now, that is a significant shift in the age structure of the population, which will have a direct impact on the economy unless the labour market participation of the over 65s increases. If current employment rates by age remain the same, the total numbers in employment will stagnate, and they will then fall at the same time as the overall population is increasing. The Dell Labour Market Bulletin states very simply that the Northern Ireland's lower overall employment rate than the UK can be wholly attributed to lower employment rates amongst older people in Northern Ireland compared to UK averages. And these rates are a major impediment to reducing unemployment and a major impediment to growing the economy. It is often suggested, and it is deeply ageist and deeply offensive to older people, that rising youth unemployment has somehow been caused by the rising employment amongst older people, or by the fact that there are more older people in our population, and that somehow those older people crowd out their younger counterparts. There is little or no academic evidence to indicate that this is the case. Indeed, the academic evidence suggests very clearly the contrary. Increased employment amongst older age groups is associated with greater youth employment and reduced youth unemployment. The crowding out argument is based very clearly on the premise that there are a fixed number of jobs in the economy, and this is an argument described by a number of leading economists as the lump of labour fallacy. Economists disagree, and they say there is not a set amount of labour because over time the number of jobs will change in line with technological improvements, and this will help provide new products and services, raise national income and increase the demand for labour throughout the economy. There is not a fixed pool of jobs, and we are missing opportunities by retaining ageist attitudes and practices which discourage and drive older people out of the workforce. So I very much welcome the way the Minister for Employment and Learning and his department have demonstrated positive attitudes and engagements with the recommendations of this Valuing an Ageing Workforce report. There are many recommendations for DEL that are relevant to DEL, and some which require further consideration and certainly, in my view, implementation. And those recommendations clearly fall into two camps. They fall into government and policy and for employers. And I would say in terms of government, really, policymakers have to reduce the extent to which retirement is a cliff edge kind of a matter. So you get to a certain age and you stop working. The policy of a fixed state pension age, which, as we all know, is increasing over time, that policy is likely to continue for the foreseeable future. But it would be very useful for the Northern Ireland Executive to ensure that there are greater incentives for people to work beyond this age. And the phasing out of default retirement age was indeed a very good start, but creative policy measures are needed to boost the workforce participation of older people. The public, generally, of all ages, actually, coming up towards and thinking about a retirement age and state pension, need to be much clearer about what their state pension entitlement will be. We've seen reports recently in the press that are only around 50% of people coming towards the new single-tier pension will actually qualify for it, yet the majority of people approaching retirement age believe that they will qualify for the new single-tier pension. And we are also not as clear as we should be about the implications of deferral of state pension, to look at the benefits for increasing your pension level by continuing to work and defer the taking of that state pension. And communication in relation to pensions and people's individual decisions is absolutely critical. It's also important that the Executive looks at why so many people leave work in their 50s, and a large number of those people are providing informal care, either to other older people or to grandchildren or to adult children with learning disabilities, very often leaving employment because of lack of flexibility for that caring role. And very often, once people have left employment in their 50s, they don't ever re-enter the workforce again. And flexibility, and greater flexibility, is absolutely vital if informal carers are to be able to remain effectively in the workplace and make their contribution. We also, obviously, policymakers need to address the problem of unemployment and economic activity across all age groups. But there is a strong case for a commitment from the Executive for lifelong learning, so that individuals are enabled to continue to update their skills right through the life course, but with a dedicated focus on older people who significantly underuse and under-benefit from lifelong learning opportunities. And older people, of course, do receive less investment in learning and development than any other age group. There's a case for government to subsidise some of the costs associated with offering training or retraining to older workers, particularly for those smaller employers who may not have the resources of big or medium-sized organisations, because significantly and overall, employers have to ensure access and equality to training for all their employees across all ages, but they are often saying that they find that difficult to do. I think the Executive should invest very considerable effort in its public information campaigns that show the positive contribution of older people. We've all been through Belfast City Airport and places like that and seen the poster adverts that say, Northern Ireland's a young economy. We've got hundreds of young, well-qualified IT graduates. We're a young economy. We've got lots of young graduates, young qualified graduates. No mention at all of the positive contribution made by older workers, and which could be developed if that positive contribution was publicised. But of course, we also need guidance for employers to assist them with easily accessible practical advice on valuing an ageing workforce, and it would be useful if the Executive would work with business organisations and trade unions to deliver that relevant information and support right across the region. I would want to see a rebalancing of the current system of funding for employers through apprenticeships in Northern Ireland, because at present the full cost of what's called on-the-job training are met by apprenticeships NI for those aged under 25. Once people are aged over 25, the government subsidy reduces to 50%. That is directly disadvantaging those aged over 25, and my responsibility for those aged over 60. Clearly, older people are clearly disadvantaged by that because it costs more for employers to take them on. It is a significant barrier against older people gaining employment. And if you imagine people in their 50s changing career, they will have a large number of work years in front of them. There is no guarantee with any apprentice that they will stay in that trade or profession for their entire working career. Somebody in their 50s may have 20, 25, 30 years of work in front of them, and yet still there is that direct discrimination in terms of the subsidy. Now, in terms of public policy improvements that are required to deliver improvements to health, I think while raising the state pension age will encourage some people to work for longer, it will make it necessary for some people to work for longer, but for those with an illness or disability, working beyond the state pension age may not be possible, and I believe that policy should be directed in a number of areas, key areas, particularly improving the health generally through public health measures of today's and tomorrow's older people. We want a Northern Ireland where people enter older age in better health than they currently do. We want to see improved support for those people with disabilities, because it is vital that individuals with disabilities or those who develop health problems are properly supported, so it is for them to be able to make the choice and the decision about whether to stay in work or return to employment. Now, to some extent, that responsibility rests with the individual and with the employer, but there is also a role for the Executive in this regard, in considering whether the Executive should build on the Access to Work scheme that's already in place to better support the working needs of those people who live with and develop disability or ill health. And moving on to employers, they are obviously vital leaders in ensuring the greater participation of older people in the workforce. They're absolutely vital. But there can be a tendency for employers to work very much in the short term. And I know that's an allegation that's always put to politicians. However, it is a significant feature also in the employment market. Now, impending demographic changes means that senior managers must plan over a longer time horizon and think about strategic consequences of an ageing population. There are not enough young, skilled people to fill all the jobs that the Northern Ireland economy can have in front of us. Employers have to look at that strategic context and look at what they need to do to retain, recruit and retrain older people too. This is in the interest of business, the wider economy and individual older people. And for those employers that wish to be able to expand, and also those employers and industries where there's already a skills shortage, like social care, they need to focus on employing an age-diverse workforce. Unfortunately for employers, the number of older people is set to increase significantly in the years ahead, and the majority of those older people are coming into older age healthier than ever before. So to secure that demographic dividend, rather than worrying about a potential demographic time bomb, look at the positive, I would say, both to government and employers. It is a step change in employment practice and attitude that's required to recognise the valuable contribution that older people make. By providing greater provision for flexible working and phased retirement, it involves employers in being confident to have a straightforward, open conversation with employees. I hear again and again from employers that there are difficulties in having those conversations, and that they prefer to wait to the state pension age when the person is likely to retire. And I would say to any employer that says that, if you have an underperforming employee, you deal with an underperformance issue. It is not age-related. If somebody wasn't a good employee when they're 65, they probably weren't very good when they were 45. And if their performance hasn't been dealt with, that is the responsibility of the employer. It is not an issue to do with age. Performance should be tackled appropriately, regardless of the age of person. I would also call for an increased use and encouragement to use occupational health services early to assist in decisions, with greater promotion of healthy living around the workplace to reduce the chances of ill health occurring in the first place, and more transparent, more positive recruitment processes to use at older age is not used either intentionally or unintentionally as a reason not to encourage somebody to apply or not to hire somebody. And also employers, I think, need to actively support and promote the take-up of training and development by people of all ages. In terms of Dell policy, I have had direct engagement with the Minister for Employment and Learning since the launch of Valuing an Ageing Workforce and have monitored their work. There has been a willingness to implement some of the policies, but in some areas I don't see implementation, and I would like those areas reconsidered. There is now information for carers available on Northern Ireland Direct, on NI Direct. Carers were one of the case studies cited by Dell in their recent Enabling Success strategy on economic inactivity, which highlighted some of the difficulties faced by carers. But still, there are no specific measures to support carers in relation to the workforce, and too many carers leave employment because of lack of flexibility and never re-enter the workforce. There's no dedicated programme or commitment by Dell to enhancing and learning development for older age groups. And while Dell are formally reviewing careers policies and practice in Northern Ireland, older people must be a dedicated focus for this service because they significantly have underused it and been underprovided by it to date. The commitment in Enabling Success to a public information campaign publicising the positive contribution of older people is very welcome. This should be implemented in full and as decisively and quickly as possible, and should include guidance and practical support and toolkits for employers. However, there is still ingrained ageism, so whether it's the apprenticeship strategy and action plan which I referred to earlier, younger people have been prioritised, judging success against youth unemployment rates rather than the growth of the economy as a whole, and rather than looking at an age-diverse workforce. It is about protecting youth apprenticeships from budgetary reductions, whilst making it clear that subsidies for adult apprenticeships will be reduced. This policy makes an older apprentice less economically attractive for an employer, and it asks the industry and business sector really to make a decision based on short-termism rather than the reality of who's going to be the best employee. Dell have confirmed to me that they are content with disability employment provision with programmes like Access to Work, Workable and Work Connect, but the Access to Work programme has been criticised in Assembly committees as not being sufficiently well promoted, struggling to cope with the increased demand and pressures on budget. And my understanding is that in 2013 it helped retain 90 people in employment. There are significant policy gaps. I met the Minister for Employment and Learning in September 2014 and provided advice about what could be done to improve the employment prospects of older people, and it requires a set of innovative policy measures that have been referenced in Valuing an Ageing Workforce. Advice particularly on a commitment to encouraging or incentivising older people to stay in work for longer for themselves and the economy, to move away from it just being about the rights of older people to work or not work and look at it as an economic argument. The need to end that cliff-edge retirement age, looking at early retirement opportunities, phased retirement opportunities, and employer confidence to have direct conversations with people about their retirement choices. There is really insufficient evidence about why so many people in Northern Ireland leave paid work in their 50s, and I think that merits merits additional and further attention and research. I would like to see a commitment to give carers both the same rights as parents, not only to request time off work for their caring responsibilities, but also to receive that paid time off work. The view from carers very much is that with that flexibility they will be able to carry out their caring responsibilities, remain making a useful contribution in the workplace, and when, as and if their caring responsibilities end, their health is in better shape, their finances are in better shape, and they will continue to be able to make their economic contribution through work. But they need that flexibility desperately. I think Dell should work more closely with employers to develop and encourage a commitment to lifelong lifelong learning and a focus on those industries who are finding it currently hard to recruit. And this could include offering subsidies of some of the costs associated with training and retraining across all ages, but remembering that the older people of today benefit substantially less from that investment to date. Access to apprenticeships, it is technically available, irrespective of age. Technically available, but I believe indirectly discriminatory because the funding of those apprenticeships favours the under-25s. And I don't believe that Dell should be content with disability employment provision. The Access to Work scheme in particular could be expanded to better support the working needs of those living with disabilities. When I've worked with employers to look at encouraging an age-diverse workforce and to find out what are the issues that concern them or where they want additional assistance, progressive, good, forward-thinking employers say categorically that older workers make good employees. They are reliable, they are willing to train and retrain, they are good team players, they turn up regularly, they have lower rates of absence leave and definitely lower rates of short-term absence leave. Yet they are worried, employers are worried about technical compliance with age discrimination, not discriminating on the grounds of age in employment. They're worried about making sure that they do that and are placing less effort on ensuring an age-diverse workforce. And they want assistance with that. They want to be able to promote the positive contribution of older people and get some assistance to be able to manage that change, that demographic change, in the interest of their own business, the individual workers and the wider economy. Older workers do bring considerable value. A lady called Sarah Harper, who's the director of the Oxford Institute of Population Ageing, said employers look at the older workforce as more experienced, especially when the skills shortage is being felt. Look at the figures today, the employment reports today. That is the situation that we are in Northern Ireland. And I would say the Department of Work and Pensions, from the UK government's perspective, has now made a commitment to employ a business champion for older workers. They appointed a lady called Ros Altman in 2013 to the post. She took it up in July 2014, which ties in with a broader strategy to encourage the employment of older workers, which was set out by the Department for Work and Pensions in their policy, Fuller Working Lives. And since appointment, you will, I'm sure, be familiar, but Ros Altman has been an active and public champion for older workers, disagreeing with DWP guidance by stating that employers, for example, should be barred from only advertising jobs for recent graduates, commissioning research showing the substantial number of older people who wish to work beyond 65 and assembling an over-50s employer advisory group. And the Fuller Working Lives state that there can be a significant negative individual and economic consequences to individuals who leave work early, and it proposes clear measures to help people with health conditions, assist carers, to provide better back-to-work support for older people, encourage more training and skills development, and provide better incentives for older people to work. And while Fuller Working Lives is not identical to valuing an ageing workforce, the rationale behind the report, much of the demographic evidence and a number of the policy measures are compatible, and I would commend the Fuller Working Lives also to the committee as a document worth considering. And those key measures, like the extension of the right to request and receive flexible working when people have caring responsibility, clarity in pensions, clear guidance kits and toolkits for employers, increased support for carers, the active involvement of older workers in championing what they can bring to the economy, and more support for training and development of older workers will assist the individual older worker, the business and the wider economy. And I would say, test that out yourselves. Have a look at the policy, have a look at the guidance. If you need any additional information about the value to the economy, please do come back to me and ask me. But I would ask you to believe the evidence. The economy needs older workers if it is to grow. Older people do not crowd out younger people in the workforce, and they make a very significant positive contribution. And whenever you hear negative comment about older people in the workplace, which I'm sure you all have, please, in general, regard that as a performance management issue, which is a responsibility of management. It is not an issue to do with age. All of those recommendations are contained in Valuing an Ageing Workforce. And I'm very happy to assist you in any way with questions so that we can secure the economic growth that we all seek, the reduction overall in unemployment levels, and to support older workers who wish to retain in the workforce. And just before anybody asks me, because I'm sure you would at the end, I am absolutely also confident that older people must have the right not to work, the right to retire should they wish to do so. It has to be a matter of informed choice. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Okay, Commissioner, thank you very much. Your comments, I suppose, in regard, and this, whether we're guilty of it or what, we've extended and concentrated quite a lot in the NICVA category.
Yes.
To an extent that we had an inquiry into the investigation on. Are we feeling older people then, as well, in your opinion? Or is it because, how would you say, is it because there's a handy acronym there that they're further up the agenda, or is there through political will to do something?
I understand why there's been a drive to focus on the challenge of youth unemployment and the need for training and education for young people. I understand that. My remit is in relation specifically to older people, and I do believe that older people are being undermined and failed in the support that they need and that employers need to retain them in the workforce. And I think there is ingrained ageism within the system. The apprenticeships example is a very sharp and obvious example. But generally, if you talk and listen to employers, they are reluctant to invest for the longer term, very often in older workers. And they also can display quite ageist attitudes. But when they take the time to pay attention to the actual academic evidence, the business evidence, and listen to business organisations like the CBI, like Business in the Community, they have a different view. And they support age-diverse workforces and recognise the evidence that the economy can only grow if those older workers are encouraged to remain in the workforce. So I think there is a failure at this point to recognise the contribution that older people can and do make, and to take active steps to promote their retention and recruitment.
In regard to training then, for the older people who either want to re-enter the workforce or progress within the workforce, one of the concerns this committee has raised in the forthcoming DEL budget, or the draft budget, is the loss of the 16,000 college places. You indicated very strongly, the opportunities for lifelong learning for older people. Do you think our older people are going to be more adversely affected in that reduction in numbers rather than the young people?
If you look at the increase in the proportion of the population that is going to be over 65, I think it is inevitable that when there is a reduction, it will significantly impact older people. I think in terms of employment at the moment, the significant issue is that really quite very prevalent ageist attitude, which is that it's not worth training or retraining older people. They won't want to learn, they won't want to retrain, they won't be able to understand new technology. It's just simply wrong, and it is desperately prevalent. It's desperately prevalent within the education and learning sector. It is desperately prevalent within employers, and it's desperately prevalent within the population as a whole. There is an attitude which suggests that older people cannot, will not, and won't desire to train, retrain, take up employment and consider their options. The evidence is against them, and I think policy is behind the evidence.
Have you any examples of good practice then, of employers in Northern Ireland who would go against that trend?
There are. I won't cite particular examples. I would encourage you to contact the employer organisations like Business in the Community and CBI and listen to those employer organisations directly rather than my naming particular businesses. But there clearly are. I've had conversation with a number of employers who clearly practice positive attitudes to an age-diverse workforce and will say loudly and clearly and will champion for you in this promotion public information campaign quite clearly the valuable contribution made by older people and that their business couldn't have grown without that. So quite clearly they are there, and the employer organisations should be able to assist you in that way.
In regard then to the discrepancy in apprenticeships, apprenticeships are being very much sold as being all-age apprenticeships.
Yeah.
When you raised the issue with the Minister, which I think you did by your indication, what was his response to that, or how did he?
I would say, excuse me, that the Minister understood the issue very clearly and let me know that he would give it further consideration. At this point, I don't see any change in the policy or the practice.
Okay, thanks. Davy?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Commissioner, for your report. Very, very, very welcome. Just continuing on the theme of the employers then, and you indicate obviously that they are vital leaders in this sector. You indicate that the tendencies for employers to work in the short term. Would you like to explain that just a wee bit further?
That's a view very often from employer organisations and from employers, that they are working towards the immediate bottom line. They're looking to find an employee, to replace an employee, to find somebody with the skills that they need right now. And that idea of looking towards investing for the longer term in training and development is something that they, with their business bottom line, can often find quite difficult. And they are asking clearly for guidance and kind of toolkit type approach, which is additional to how not to discriminate on the grounds of age in employment, but actually how to be within the law and promote an age-diverse workforce, and they are certainly looking for confident investment and support to be able to train and develop older people and who are in work and older people coming in. It is that immediate business need. They want people off the shelf very often who are trained and able, or they believe will stay with them for the long term. And of course that's not necessarily a younger person. There is nothing to say that because you recruit a person of any age that they will stay with your industry or your firm for life.
Thank you. And moving across to the sort of the union side of the things, how do you find it sits with the unions?
Again, the conversations that I've had, the engagement I've had with trade unions is very supportive of the idea of growth in the economy, creating a larger number of jobs, and have been, in my understanding, convinced by the evidence that older people don't crowd out younger people. It is not an intergenerational row. It is a real opportunity to grow the economy and grow the number of jobs, and therefore to reduce poverty and disadvantage amongst older people going forward, and also to retain that skill in the workforce. So I've had no resistance from trade unions on this issue.
Yeah, thank you. And finally, I was going to ask about local champions of, the situation in the sector. You did give an example then later on in the presentation. Is there an opportunity then for more local champions to be?
I think there is. I think there's a very good opportunity. Have a look at the Department for Work and Pensions older persons champion, older workers champion, and that idea of an over 50s advisory group which will champion really the contribution that older people could make. But I would say think a little bit wider as well. Engage employers, engage trade unions, and engage those older workers, because together they will bring to life the international academic evidence and the business practice evidence which is out there, and they will bring it to life and they will make it believable, because it is real people and real examples that makes it believable for employers who are saying, well, I'd like to do it, but I'm not sure if I'll be within the law, I'm not sure how to do it, oh, it's too much trouble, I don't know, I can just sort this out for now. That is what will give them that kind of degree of confidence and knowledge, and I would say you've got a very good opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Claire and Ben. And certainly, I think the Chair's points earlier on are valid. We have been focused intensely on youth unemployment and economic inactivity, but I want to go back to some of the points you made in relation to the access to work, and certainly the Minister is bringing forward an economic inactivity strategy. And I take the point, I reflect on the City of Culture in my own city, the remarkable contribution that older people played as ambassadors voluntarily as well, may I add, as mentors for many young people. So we do understand and acknowledge that in this House, and particularly I think the last all-party motion was on this particular subject matter. So it is getting a level of relevance, but I'm like the Chair, what can we do more to ensure that it remains on the agenda? And what can we do more to ensure that, I chair the all-party group on learning disabilities, and yesterday, on budgetary concerns, we had testimony from 3 parents across Northern Ireland, 2 of them older people, 2 of them in crisis, 2 of them, the testimonies are so emotional to the people in tears. As they grow older, the pressures become insurmountable, and they're not able to take up work because of those pressures, and they are this bracket of economic inactivity. What could you say to them? Is there anything we can be doing better to ease the pressures and burdens on them? And I accept your very valid points. Clearly, you're a champion for older people. The significant contribution they make in the workforce. But what can we do more to ensure that the smaller businesses are more prepared as the ageing population increases?
You make a number of points there, Pat. If I start, if I could, with the role of carers in particular. There are a large number of carers who really never get near the workforce in the first place. A large number of carers, and whose health, their own individual health, is not as good as it could be, who have not always had the support and practical respite and other support that they've needed to retain their own health, and they've certainly not had the opportunity for enough care for the person they care for to be able to consider entering training, learning or the workforce, and that is a significant issue. There are also a large number of carers, people who provide informal care, who become carers in later life. So somebody in their 40s and 50s, their parents start to need care. So in a different kind of a situation, and those people can have very considerable difficulties in work. It can also be difficult for employers to provide that flexibility, but the individual carer can have enormous difficulty juggling and balancing that responsibility to care for an older person, maybe somebody who lives with dementia, at the same time as holding down a job. And I think employers could do with some very, very direct support in relation to both a consolidation of the rights of older carers, but also practical guidance to employers about how to remain within the law and be as flexible as possible, and also what else they might be able to do to assist them. And I think working with the business community would be a good opportunity for you to look at how to do that, because once those carers come out of the workplace, they tend never to go back into it again. And there may be 20 years between coming out of employment and state retirement pension age, and it is far too long, and it means that those people who become carers are very likely to enter older age in greater poverty and disadvantage than they otherwise would have done. You're also talking about what it is we can do to recognise that positive contribution of workers, and you refer to City of Culture. I'm very familiar with a number of volunteers, older volunteers from the City of Culture, and they had a fabulous experience. They were properly supported as volunteers. They absolutely championed the city, they championed culture and the arts, and they were absolute ambassadors for the arts and for the city, without question. But they also said to me that they felt properly treated as volunteers. They felt treated in a way which said, I tell you what, it's brilliant that you've come forward. We'll train you, provide everything you need, because you're providing the time. We'll provide the training, the expertise, the information, the support, and felt very valued by that. And those are the sorts of champions that we need, is people who have felt valued and what that actually looks like to be valued. But I think for this to remain on the agenda, the positive contribution campaign that is planned by Dell about the positive contribution of older people needs to be supplemented by substantive direct engagement with business, and listen to what businesses' concerns are, as well as just what looks on the evidence like a good approach. Listen to what their concerns are and take the time to engage with them to find solutions for them. I would say not only to promote the positive contribution of older people, but engage older people, businesses and trade unions as champions of that positive approach, and celebrate the change, celebrate the evidence, track the difference that you make and talk it up, because the economy can't grow unless we do that.
Just, Chair, just to finish on, the access to work one is something that certainly we can have a role in ensuring that the Department are meeting and increasing the targets. Those figures you mentioned, something like 80, are very, very low to me. So I think it's something at a later stage we could raise with the Department.
Thank you. I think that is something that could usefully be addressed.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Anna?
Thank you. It's an excellent report.
Thank you very much,
Claire,
Anna.
and I think I agree with Pat. You know, we've concentrated, we always talk so much about helping young people to find jobs and in economic inactivity for young people, and yet they're at the other end of the spectrum. We're not saying helping that older people, and I do know a lot of colleagues, ex-colleagues and friends who were made redundant, say with the recession. In the 50s for the first time in their life, and really finding it really difficult to find another job. But another thing is too, we are seeing the expenditure cut with public services, and we are seeing 20,000 people come, who may seek voluntary redundancy in the next few years. Do you think we help older people enough if they want to, say, when they leave work in the 50s, made redundant or whatever, that we don't help them enough to think of setting themselves up in business rather than trying to find another job? With ageism, with difficulties with jobs, I think there are opportunities for people to set themselves up with their experience as consultants or get into business. I mean, do we do enough to help them?
That's a very interesting question, Anna, because the question of self-employment, we do see rising rates of self-employment amongst older people and people wanting to use their skills and their experience in that self-employment market. There is very little direct support focused on older people undertaking new business opportunities or setting themselves up. There have been a number of schemes over time that have been run to support older people or to pilot different methodologies for engaging older people in self-employment. But it is something that a lot of older people are interested in, particularly when people have been made redundant or they see a significant change in their desire for their work pattern. And I think there could be a very useful focus on self-employment and the reality of it and how to value that opportunity.
That's not in your report, though, is it?
No, it's not. No, it's not. And I will look again at the evidence if the committee would like further evidence on self-employment. This is very much about an ageing workforce. This is very much about the people in employment. There are also significant issues, though, to support and encourage both volunteering and self-employment. volunteering has largely been the subject of a report called Appreciating Age, which recognised the contribution of older people. Some reference to tax and contributions made by older people in self-employment, but it is an area of interest and focus.
Okay, thanks, Anna. Tom Buchanan, to the Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. And quite a number of issues have already been covered this morning. And certainly, as a society, we are indebted to the older generation for their experience, their expertise, and so forth. But do you see the fixed state pension age as a barrier to older people to stay in employment and to employers to continue employing people whenever they come to that particular age? And if so, what do you think should be done there?
I don't think the state retirement age is, the state pension age is a barrier to employment. No, I don't. I think the lack of understanding about flexibility and deferral of pensions is a barrier to people making informed choice about whether to stay in work or whether not to. And I think the lack of knowledge about the new single-tier pension due to come in very shortly, which most people are expecting as they come into retirement to receive in full, but only about half of them have enough contributions to do so. That will be a deciding factor for a lot of people when they get that projection about whether or not to try and stay in work or not. I don't see the actual state pension age as the barrier in itself. I think it is lack of understanding about the pension in general, what people will get and their opportunities to make choices that are informed. That's the problem.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Fra?
Sure, and again, as Tom said, Pat covered a number of the issues that I wished to, and I have to say that it was an excellent presentation, and thank you for that. Because I think it's presentations like that, and especially the statistics on it, actually make you not only realise that a failure to start to deal with some of the difficulties that are arising now will come back to haunt us somewhere down the lane. And I know Thomas spoke about the older generation and what they've done, but we need to take into consideration that half of us around this table would fit into the older generation bracket, and that needs to be taken on board also. I do think that at this committee we have raised the whole issue about people over 25 and the 50% reduction in the budget, and because there were people that had approached us. I think one of the difficulties that I've seen over a long period of time are people who hit at that stage, that magic age of 65, wanted to stay on, and were near enough forbidden and were eased out the door, and the impact that has on them mentally and physically afterwards, trying to come to terms with maybe 30 or 40 years work but behind them. Recently I was within this last year in Canada, and you start to see quite a number of businesses where much older people are employed, and then you would see here, and it may be a question that had been asked: are there good practices elsewhere that we could look into? Anna's right that we have done inquiries. We've done inquiries into apprenticeships. We've done apprenticeship inquiries into careers. We're doing one then post 19, SEN, and all of them, I think what is lost in it, we never discussed older people and the impact that it's having. So maybe that's one of the things that we need to look at. But I think what we also need to do is to tap into good practices elsewhere in other jurisdictions and find out how that works. I think in all of it we need to bring with us because we are a scrutiny committee. I think what we need to bring with us is employers and the departments to ensure that they buy into the messages you're selling here.
And I think you have a really, really good opportunity both to look at the international evidence, and I can certainly provide some examples for you. But certainly there is good literature on the international best practice examples. It is available. It is out there for you. And I would also say you've got a very good opportunity. The government's the active ageing strategy is not yet published. There are opportunities to look at what those clear targets would be to demonstrate publicly a commitment to growing the economy by supporting older workers. And that is an absolute shift in thinking for a lot of people. It really is. There is such deeply ingrained ageism that we have. And to shift that by saying it is worth retraining older people, it is worth investing in apprenticeships. We have to do it because it's right, and we have to do it because it will help us to grow the economy. And to be confident in your assertions in that strategic position, that it is not about taking away jobs from young people. Be very, very confident in that. It is about growing the economy and being fair. And I think you have a very good, I can certainly provide you, there are examples in Holland, for example, about the deferral of pensions, where very clear information about your right to defer your state pension and get an increased pension if you're remaining in work. Sweden, which is always one of those examples. I must go to Sweden someday. It sounds almost perfect, except probably for the furniture in IKEA, which I can't put together. More funding of lifelong learning is hugely important and highly valued in Sweden in people of all ages. And certainly in Finland, there has been a sustained promotion of the value and contribution of older workers, particularly through human resource professionals as well as through government. So there are a number of international examples within the EU as well as wider, and certainly examples like in places like Canada. You will simply see a different age profile. You look at different industries here that are already struggling to recruit. Just think about those. Look at the opportunities for people to train, the opportunities for people to be supported in employment, the flexibility that they need to be able to deliver quality for the employer, and what it is the employer needs to be able to recruit and retrain those older workers.
So just one point was, I know that a number of times you mentioned DWP. And
Yes, it is.
And is there a difference in how they deal with it in England and they deal with it here?
We don't have a comparable policy direction here. We don't have that focus on older workers. It's as simple as that. I have put to the Minister that it would be useful, and he has agreed that he would give it consideration. But we don't have it at this point. And I think if you look at the role that Ros Altman is performing as the older workers champion for the UK government, it is a useful function, and that bringing together of older people of the over 50s in an advisory capacity to look at the contribution they make is very useful, but I would suggest that here it would be very useful to supplement that directly with employers and trade unions to have a round-the-table approach.
Okay. I think one of the things just for highlight, even in our careers, information, advice and guidance inquiry,
Yes.
nobody who came to present evidence to us ever mentioned the need for careers advice for older people. There was talk about putting it into primary schools, but never towards the upper end of the age bracket. So I think that's been definitely worthwhile from that point
And
of
I
view.
think, Chairman, if I just might comment on that, I think that is where we see the difference between direct discrimination and an ingrained ageist attitude. So if an older person had turned up at the careers service and asked for advice and information, probably would have got it. The careers service didn't think, or didn't appear to think, that it was really focusing on that age group, and a lot of older people have taken the view that it isn't for them because of the way it's promoted. So you have a kind of it's not that the person wouldn't have got the service had they turned up, but it is because of the attitudes
not the
and
target.
Promotion. It's very, very unlikely that they would.
Yeah, okay, Claire.
Ageism, in my opinion, is probably the most accepted form of discrimination. And I think it's actually quite ironic because it's the one thing that unites us all. Every background, every gender, every religion will all grow old. So, you know, it's one of them things that does sort of baffle me why we don't have more of a focus on it. I'm one of the youngest members in the Assembly, and I almost feel that my generation does have a responsibility to look after the people, let's face it, that looked after them, and certainly to be selfish about it. We're all going to grow old, you know, so, you know, I'm looking after my own interests in that respect too. And again, even as a representative of East London Derry, I have a significant amount of my constituents who are of the older population, and certainly everyone around this table would be able to say the same. We are an ageing population, so it's something that I do think that we really do need to put focus on. I suppose to bring it back to what we're talking about today, I would be a champion or an advocate even of lifelong learning. Because I feel that way because I think experience that you get from jobs is how you learn, and I think that's developed through lifelong learning. And I think it's almost remiss of me to be such an advocate for work experience and not to be alongside that be an advocate for the people who have experience, if that makes sense. From my own opportunities that I've had in life. The greatest mentor I had, and he wouldn't like me to say it, but he was a man who would be considered an older person, and I hung off his every word, and certainly I'm sitting here today because of him. So I definitely don't think it's a case that older people will be in competition with younger people. If anything, it's a great compliment, to one another. You learn from each other. So certainly I subscribe to everything you do say, and I don't think it's a case that we're deliberately missing out older people. I think it's a case of that we almost have forgotten about them, and in itself that's quite sad. And personally, I'm very disappointed by the approach of this executive to actually address the needs of older people. I think they've been actually quite irresponsible almost in looking at the needs of older people, and it's something that I have challenged them on with, unfortunately, no great strides forward, and hopefully people in this committee will see the need for that to sort of push their ministers on. But again, it was really just a comment, and I hope people do sort of sit up and take notice to look after. As an MLA, I think it's certainly my responsibility that there's three main groups that we should look after, and it's younger people, older people, and the vulnerable. And everyone else, yes, that comes next. But certainly that's what I'll be doing. So thank you for your presentation. I think it's necessary, and I also think it's an important point to say that this isn't a case of keeping more people in work. We have to address each individual need, and if someone reaches the retirement age now and decides, okay, I need to leave work, that's fine. But should they feel they want to move on, that's also fine. We need to look at this as an individual circumstance. Someone at 50 may feel that way, someone even earlier may feel that way. It's not a case of, as you say, that cliff drop. We have to look at it in a more, I suppose, realistic approach. Unfortunately, this world and in policy, we very much try to apply a black and white approach, but it's not that case at all, and we know that ourselves when we talk to people on the ground and see that. So very much welcome that, and I hope the message definitely gets through.
Thank you very much. And I would certainly support the idea of mutual advantage and learning from and across generations, and certainly employers that I've listened to very who employ an age-diverse workforce. One of the big contributions they say their older workers make is they are helpful to new younger colleagues. They are good team players. They're willing to share their experience and their knowledge without presuming they know everything, also willing to learn. And I think that evidence of mutual benefit is very strong. Claire, thank you for raising that. But I think also that question of the right not to remain in employment is important for older people. And that question of investing in health generally, upstream, in training and learning, and in the knowledge about pension entitlements is important so that people can make informed choice at each stage of their working lives.
Roman?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. And the question has been asked of this committee, what can we do? And I noticed that you have a recommendation here on apprenticeships, and apprenticeships are an important way of gaining skills, knowledge and experience. Now, the figures show that we have almost 6,300 apprenticeships here in the north, and there's only 267 of those individuals acknowledged as having a disability. So, as an action point from this committee, I would suggest that we write to the department asking, how well do apprenticeships cater for older people here in the north, so we can start putting a focus, on that particular area as well. What also concerns me, and I think there's an acute problem here, and that's for older people living in rural areas, in particular women. And I know quite a lot of women in my own area, 60 plus, who can't drive, including my own mother. Yeah. And it's a great disadvantage. So it would concern me, especially in the rural areas. But thank you for your
Thank you very much. I think it is an important question, the question of apprenticeships, because almost regardless of the numbers of people who take it up, or older people who take it up, it's a significant statement of intention that there is equal merit in investing in older people as well as in younger people. And I think, as well as whatever correspondence you have with the department, the opportunity to include in the active ageing strategy clear targets which focus on guidance for employers, older workers, champions, engagement, public information campaigns, and changing that focus on apprenticeships would be really, really valuable, clear, measurable targets which benefit older people and demonstrate that it's of value to the economy. I think you've got a really useful opportunity.
Okay, there's no other indication for any other speakers or any other people to ask you questions. So I want to thank you for your presentation. I'll certainly give the committee some food for thought this morning. And maybe as a committee we could get agreement to send a copy of the Hansard to the department to allow them to look at it.
Thank you. And it's always, Chairman, it's a pleasure to be of any assistance I can. If there's further information that you require as a committee, I'm very happy to provide it. Any points of clarification at all. But thank you very much indeed for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Move on to our next presentation, a briefing from the NICVA, Economic Analysis of the Living Wage in Northern Ireland. And page 77, you'll see a report of the economic analysis, and at page 112, the economic analysis of the living wage. I want to welcome Mr. Seamus McAlevey, Chief Executive of the Northern Ireland Council, and Dr. Matthew Das, Oxford Economics. We have someone else here. Owen Rainey, yeah. Well, welcome you all to the table this morning, and we'll give you 10 minutes or so to give us your presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for the invitation to come along today. And as you say, we'll take a few moments to give you some background into the report and its findings. This report, obviously commissioned by NICVA, into the economic aspects and likely impact of the living wage and its implementation if it was to be implemented in Northern Ireland. From our point of view in NICVA, we've been carrying out a range of economic analysis, commissioned a wide number of reports, as members will know. We have our own unit in terms of the Centre for Economic Empowerment, which Owen heads up. And I suppose with regard to the living wage, I mean, NICVA would have a view that it considers the living wage a desirable thing. I think there's broad political consensus in that. I know the Prime Minister, David Cameron, talking about it and indicating his support for it. So there's a general view, I think, that it is desirable, but what we wanted to look at was what the likely outcomes are, because from our point of view, just because something is desirable doesn't mean it can necessarily be done or achieved. So we wanted to look at the evidence with regard to this issue and look at that either for or against and see how it fell. So from that point of view, we commissioned Oxford Economics, and I'm going to pass you over to Matthew, who will talk to the report itself. And then I'll just take a moment with Owen to look at maybe what some of the policy options might be coming out of this. But I'll pass you to Matthew to talk about the report.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for this opportunity to talk about the report. Just as Jim said, Oxford Economics were commissioned last year by NICVA to look at the living wage in Northern Ireland. And I think the question we specifically set out to ask was a kind of a hypothesis, which was what would happen if the living wage was introduced as a wage floor, a minimum wage in Northern Ireland in 2012. Now, the living wage at that time was £7.20, I think. And what I've passed out, and I apologise for the poor quality of it, it's all my printer allowed me to do last night, but what I've sort of passed out is the 4 key quantitative findings of the report that we were able to come up with. So, had the living wage been introduced in 2012 as a minimum wage, our analysis indicated that wages in Northern Ireland would have increased by 221 million. That consumer spending would have been boosted by 132 million. That GDP would have increased by 84 million. And consequently, there would have been additional employment of 2,500. And what I want to do for just the remaining of my time is just give you a bit more background on these figures. So if we take the wage increase, the first thing we had to do in calculating the wage increase was look at the number of people in Northern Ireland who earned below the living wage in 2012. And using labour market data, we were able to estimate that about 1,700 or 173,000 employees in Northern Ireland earned below the living wage, which is about 23% of Northern Ireland's workforce. Now, had all those employees received a wage increase, so they earned at least £7.20 an hour, the wage increase on aggregate would have been 121 million in Northern Ireland. But the next question we had to ask ourselves was, how would this be paid for? And in our research, we were able to identify 5 channels through which businesses and organisations could pay for a wage increase. I'll just sort of list them now for you. So these aren't in any ranked order as such, but one option would be that businesses could reduce their employment and use the savings from that employment reduction to pay for the new increase. They could reduce other labour costs, such as training or non-wage benefits. They could reduce the hours, or perhaps reduce the wages of higher paid individuals to pay for the increase in the lower paid. They could reduce profits, which would have ultimately had a knock-on effect on the owner's returns. They could they could pass the wage increase on to consumers in the form of higher prices. And finally, businesses could witness and experience an increase in productivity as a result of increasing wages at the bottom end of their labour force. And what I really mean by that is that very simply, because people are now getting paid more, they work harder and they produce more output. And it's important to note with this final channel that if the living wage was implemented and it was paid for through productivity improvements, this would have no negative economic consequences throughout the Northern Ireland economy, because effectively it's paid for itself through people producing more, raising the overall supply of the economy. So whenever we looked at our literature and we looked at the evidence for each of these channels, we decided that the best assumption we could make was that the living wage would be paid entirely by productivity improvements. Now, this isn't to say that this channel is exclusive of all the other channels. It's not. But based on the evidence, we were finding that the strongest evidence was coming for productivity improvements. So, as a simplifying assumption, we made that particular assumption, but we recognise that it's a best case scenario. And indeed, we have a sensitivity analysis in the report. But, so, assuming there's no cost to the Northern Ireland economy, the 221 million wages goes into the Northern Ireland economy. We need to take account of tax increases, benefit reductions and savings. But once we had done that, we were able to estimate that consumer spending would have increased by 132 million, which would have rippled through the economy and increased Northern Ireland's GDP by 84 million, including the wider multiplier effects. And because of this increase in GDP, that ultimately would have created additional jobs, and we calculated that would be 2,500. So I think the sort of summary conclusion of the report is that had the living wage been implemented in 2012, it would have created a net positive gain for the Northern Ireland economy, albeit that gain would have been relatively modest. And that's my conclusion.
Thank you, Matt. I just, coming from the report then, some of the possible policy options of UNGA, just talk about those.
Okay. NICVA, like many people, would have a strong moral and ethical investment in the idea that all workers should be paid the living wage. We commissioned this research really to find out if that was an economically desirable situation, a situation in which everyone would pay at least a living wage. And the report and other reports suggest that that is the case. If that is accepted, the question then arises of how to actually get there, how to actually achieve a situation in which everyone is paid the living wage. That discussion is at a very early stage, but there are a number of levers which could be used as part of an overall strategy to promote the living wage. One is the use of public procurement, and particularly greater use of social clauses to advance the living wage. There are various options around the use of financial incentives. So, for example, the tax system could reward living wage employers. Minimum wage legislation is another option. There has been some debate around regionalisation of minimum wage levels. there's a debate around that, which I'm happy to come back to. Another option that Matt in particular has highlighted is improving productivity, in the hope that that will in turn feed through to higher wage levels, although, as Matt points out, the opposite can also be the case. Another set of options are around encouraging voluntary arrangements. So there's many options around this, but one would be the use of business improvement districts, in which employers collectively agree to pay their staff at least a living wage. Finally then, there's encouraging forms of collective bargaining on pay levels, so maybe a greater workplace bargaining, or indeed on a sectoral basis, more encouragement of minimum pay levels.
Thank you very much, sure. As I say, we're happy to take questions.
Okay, thanks, Seamus. Apologies for not being here at the opening of your presentation, but Matt, of the 5 strands where you say the company or the employer can make up the difference in the finances, to reduce or cut their wage bill removes money from the Northern Ireland economy. To reduce labour costs, in other ways, reducing hours, non-wage benefits, reduces money from the Northern Ireland economy. For the firm to take reduced profits, removes money from the Northern Ireland economy. To pass on the cost to a higher pay bill to consumers is also removing money from the Northern Ireland economy. So I'm trying to get my head, I'm not opposed to the practicality of the living wage, but out of those 5 strands, I can't see where this increase of 84 million comes from, because I can't see how the living wage creates new money.
Okay, yeah, no, and that's, I mean, that's the kind of intuitively the first question I think which strikes you whenever you think about this issue. I think it's important just to note that whenever we're talking about this analysis, we're talking about the overall macro economy and not individual businesses there will be winners and losers across the board. But the reason we think that there will be a boost or creating of more GDP in Northern Ireland is because of the improvement in productivity. So if businesses don't go down the first 4 channels but pay for the increase through productivity, they ultimately produce more in the economy. So I think just sort of standard economic theory is that if you raise your aggregate supply level in the economy and have the demand to meet it, you've effectively created more output. So just to take a simple example, if a manufacturer increases the wages of his workers and through various reasons they increase their productivity, perhaps through they have lower turnover rate, so as they grow in experience they become more productive, as is generally accepted. Perhaps just because they're being paid more, they feel the need to work harder and produce more. They ultimately produce more output, which is then sold, which then comes back to the business in the form of greater profits. And it's that kind of mechanism that creates increased GDP in the Northern Ireland economy.
So is this the productivity strand that you see would increase that 84 million rather than the other 4?
Yes, no, and I think that's an important point, that the model has been developed on a simplifying assumption that productivity pays for everything. And we didn't just come up with that assumption. If we take, for example, reductions in employment, if we look at the past UK studies on the effects of the minimum wage, there's very little evidence to suggest that there's been any major unemployment created through that. And it's building the assumptions together to form something that's acceptable but simple, because ultimately, if you tried to trace all the different effects of these channels through the economy, it would be an extremely large piece of research.
Okay. I'm sorry to labour this, but figure 2.8 of your report shows the proportion of employees earning below the living minimum wage by industry. And if I take your strand 5, which is the production through manufacturing, the main 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The 8 main proportion of employers here below the living minimum wage are all service industries. I'm trying to get my head around where this, the headline figure is this puts 84 million into the economy. I can't see it, man, through this report.
Okay.
And that's one.
Well, for example, I think if we just move down to 2.9, which is the actual absolute figures increase. So these are just proportions, which wouldn't reflect the actual numbers of people who've received increases. Albeit, I do completely understand from if it's a service, for example, it may not have the same ability to increase productivity. But even if we took the example of a hairdresser, if they just simply worked harder because they're being paid more, they can see more customers, they can make additional profits. Like it is possible for us.
But if you want to refer to 2.8,
yeah,
or look, we'll even go if you're wanting to talk about 2.9, wholesale and retail trade, which is the biggest section. Accommodation, food services, human health and social work activities is the bottom three there.
Yeah.
How do you increase productivity in that? Because I'm concerned if you go down the other 4 channels,
yeah,
you're actually taking people out of the workforce in those areas.
Well, I suppose it's, as I said, this report is based on the macroeconomy, and we have based our assumptions on literature that's already been published. So I think, if you ask those sort of specific questions about wholesale retail, and we look at a specific business in Northern Ireland, perhaps a retail will be able to, if its staff are paid more, they will work harder within that business. They'll be more experienced with how the business works because there's a slower turnover or a lower turnover rate, and they ultimately produce more. That's the general point of higher productivity. It's if people are working more efficiently within individual businesses, because unless we're assuming that all businesses are working at 100% efficiency, they will produce more and they will sell more and they will have additional profits. That's not to say that firms wouldn't go down a different channel. That's not to say that they wouldn't choose to make employees redundant, that they didn't think they could drive the productivity gains. This report is meant to provide an economic discussion about the different consequences of the living wage. And we have presented our scenario as the best case scenario, so this is what we would ultimately all love to see happen. But there is a sensitivity scenario in there where we do model unemployment coming through the economy as well. So we do try and provide a sense of really what I think you're saying is that perhaps these firms at the top end would create unemployment.
Chair, can I add to that? I think there is a very clear need for further research in terms of the implications and impact in specific sectors. That's when we look at the macro impacts.
Yeah. Pat?
Yeah. Good morning. You're very welcome. I suppose reflecting over recent years, and we have on the one hand those people who unfortunately find themselves on benefits, and you heard earlier about those economically inactive, but certainly there's increased numbers of people across Northern Ireland who find themselves caught in poverty traps. And this terminology now, the working poor, is so relevant in our communities, and any of us and all of us who are on the campaign trail are getting this in the doors, and it is those families. And I do see, and SDLP has seen for some time, and we articulated through having Belfast City Council, the first council in Northern Ireland to be a living wage council. So we do see the merits of that. And I take your point. I think that it's important that those who would get the living wage, not only would it increase productivity, but it would increase morale and motivation within the workforce. In turn, it would give a sense of value not just to the employee, but to their families and the spending power that they would have then in the communities that wouldn't help, particularly retail and service industries across Northern Ireland. So some of the questions, for example, one can imagine that you have a number of councils now looking towards achieving a living wage, or desirable, using your terminology, desirable. What about government departments? Because I often hear in my own constituency is highly dependent on public sector jobs, social security jobs, pension credit jobs. A lot of these people are hugely dependent on family tax credits. So the salaries on the public sector, contrary to what people believe, the high earners are not high earners. They're living as the working poor as well. Is there anything we can do to encourage or stimulate the government departments to come up to the mark as well, to ensure that they are bringing forward a living wage economy?
I think the first point, Pat, is it's interesting to note that the Prime Minister David Cameron has come out and supported the notion of the living wage. I mean, one of the things that we would say is that there's a significant amount of money being paid in tax credits. Some of it now has been squeezed, obviously, under the welfare reforms, which at the end of the day is a subsidy to employers, you know, because it is about people at work. So it is, you know, the transfer of that would also transfer some of the dignity, I think, that goes with people working and earning a living wage that is fit to keep them and their families. So once the Prime Minister has said something about it, I think it is important that you know, the government begins to look at, I don't know, rebalancing those transfers. You know, it's transferring a huge amount of money out of the public purse, and maybe it could look very clearly at how it rebalances that from within the payments that it's made. Because I recognise what you're saying. There's large numbers of public sector workers that are paid below the living wage.
Can I pick up? Yeah. In terms of the making work pay argument, to date that has largely been interpreted in terms of penalising people who are out of work. This is potentially a way of making work pay by rewarding people for being in work. So it's an interesting potential policy that could go alongside, for example, welfare reform. In terms of government departments and their potential role, a starting point would be to make sure that they are paying all their staff a living wage, obviously, and I don't see any reason why government departments couldn't become accredited living wage employers and demonstrate, I suppose, that publicly that they support the living wage. There's also a question around the extent to which living wage can be encouraged through public procurement. It's quite a complex area, and there is a bit of debate around it, but it's certainly something that could be looked at.
I think on that point, I mean, if you take social care has been mentioned, and obviously there are voluntary organisations that quite often deliver, and private sector bodies that deliver on behalf of government. I think there's an issue to look at there, because one of the things that government wouldn't want to do is effectively privatise the problem. You know, by going for the absolute cheapest cost. That cheapest cost can be found sometimes in people having to pay very low wages, much below, you know, living wage. So I think there are issues to look at around procurement on that one. You know.
Chair, just to follow, like yourself, I'd be keen to get more detailed information. Maybe our own research could look at implications across the spectrum. So you won't hear today, so maybe we can get a wee bit more work done. That might help yourselves as well, Seamus.
I think that would be helpful, because I mean, one of the things that what we have done here is dipped our toe in the water, but we recognise that there's a need for much more detailed research, and we've done this obviously on a number of things. But so, you know, you having a look at it and you know, looking at what a strategy might be with regard to this, I think would be very helpful.
Thank you.
Okay. David.
Thanks, Chair, and obviously the others around the table would share the desirability that yourselves with NICVA share on the living wage, and welcome the debate and welcome the toe in the water. It's time to have a look at it, you know. I've seen some commentary from the Federation of Small Businesses where they're indicating that a 20% uplift would be simply unsustainable. Was there any input from the private sector in the compilation of the report?
Well, I think no is the answer. It was debated at the scoping stage of this report, but I suppose it was viewed as too problematic to, one, decide which businesses we were going to talk to, and then ultimately in discussing how they would pay, we would have to, you know, have a look at their financial statements, have a look at, you know, try and sense check what they were saying. So I think the decision was ultimately taken to look at published data and the research that was already available.
Sorry, can I add, we were very keen to hear the views of small businesses in particular, and we invited the FSB to give a response at the launch of the research. So.
Okay. And another piece of research I looked at in relation to the presentation today, nobody really put a figure in jobs, but jobs lost. It does appear, again, I say in some commentary, they're talking about maybe 1,200 or 1,300 jobs would be lost, compared to the, what I see was 2,400 jobs created.
Yeah.
Leanne, comment on the job loss.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important point. Just let me grab my table. So, yeah, as I said, the productivity improvement is very much the best case scenario. Now, if firms decided to make some employees unemployed essentially, and there would of course be a cost to the Northern Ireland economy. But whenever we looked at past researches about, basically, without getting too technical, the elasticity of this occurrence, so for every pound of increase in the wage floor, how many people are you going to make unemployed? We didn't find a one-for-one for comparison by any means. It was always relatively small. So we did model an elasticity of unemployment, if you like, through as a sensitivity scenario, which is in the executive summary of the report. Now, we find that had this occurred, had some firms chosen to go down the channel of unemployment, that there would have been about 1,200 jobs lost in the Northern Ireland economy. However, because of the additional spend in the Northern Ireland economy, the net increase would have actually still been 1,200 jobs. And that's just simply because we're producing more, people's wages have gone up, they're spending more in their shops and so on and so forth, and more jobs can be sustained.
Yeah. I don't want to get into the whole situation that the Chair has highlighted, but are we in danger of creating an impression that some of our workforce are not wearing the desirable capacity? And certainly I know that my own sort of involvement with some of the manufacturers in my own area and a lot of agency workers and that, some people are putting a great effort in to try and secure jobs, and I'm not maybe totally convinced of this increased productivity.
Well, I think I certainly wouldn't claim that somebody needs to improve their outputs, but I mean, maybe I'll take myself as an example, just so I can't possibly get into trouble. When I first started work, I was not very good, you know. But as time has progressed, I have learned and I produce more. But clearly, I haven't changed career. Now, if I were to go into a different line of work entirely, I would start back at the start again. Now, if there's an incentive there for someone to maintain their job and continue, and they gain more experience, they are ultimately going to become more productive. And we did find evidence that minimum floors, raising them, does reduce worker turnover. So that could be one example where it's not necessarily to do with you people aren't working hard enough, but rather over time, because of the sort of economic incentives that are there, you will increase in productivity. But also, if you do give someone a wage increase, I think many people would, off the back of that, feel an urge to work harder. Not saying they're not working hard enough, but they may try and go even further. There's certainly evidence of that in the literature.
Okay, as I say, Chair, welcome to the debate, the toe in the water. I think there's a big debate to be had. So.
And just on that issue of productivity as well, I mean, obviously the economic strategy for Northern Ireland, one of the key points is to try and close the productivity gap that we have between ourselves and England. It's been very elusive over a long time. I mean, the Minister and Invest Northern Ireland has concentrated on trying to bring higher productivity jobs into Northern Ireland, which are higher wage paid, recognising that that's one of the only few ways we have of trying to close that gap. So if we stay way down in the low pay league, we'll never be able to do it. You know, so that's one of the conundrums that, as I said, that we have faced on this issue.
Okay, Anna.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. I presume you are talking about really this being carried out by a voluntary scheme, or up to organisations that can afford to do it, to adopt the living wage. Yeah. So that's one question. But the other thing is, I mean, the argument is that if you're going to have a blanket implementation, that could be counterproductive. In Northern Ireland, the majority of our businesses really are within the SMEs. And, like previously said, if they increase the minimum wage to living wage, they may have to make others redundant. So, I mean, what's your argument?
Maybe I'll start with that, Anna. In terms of, I mean, the issue around the living wage, being desirable and voluntary has been the position with regard to it up to this point. And if you take what the Prime Minister again said, those organisations or companies that can pay should pay it, I think was his point. I think when this research was done, when we commissioned it, and what we asked Oxford Economics to do was look at what the impact would be if the minimum wage had been, let's say, universal in Northern Ireland. It's not saying that that's achievable, it's outside the Assembly's powers, all of that. But it was to have a look at what the impact might be. And, as I say, to raise the level of debate, I think, with regard to that. And sometimes people think in this debate, well, if it's unaffordable, we should just forget about it, whereas we're looking at how you might cause change. Like, I can remember the debate at the time on the minimum wage. Many people said unaffordable, undesirable, we would lose large numbers of jobs. Didn't happen. So it's about trying to look at it from that perspective. But we're not saying you should simply pass a law and make the minimum wage mandatory in that sense. And you would have to look very careful. I think there are some areas that could do it, and there are other areas that would have great difficulty. Is there anything you want to add, Matt? Or?
No.
I agree that an immediate and short-term raise in the minimum wage to the living wage level would be very dangerous. But I do think there's need to discuss ways in which a move towards living wage could be encouraged and incentivised. And there's many policy options and many, I think, avenues that are very much worth exploring.
Some may even say that we shouldn't be thinking of minimum wage or living wage. We should be thinking of improving the skill levels of people in Northern Ireland, rather than going for the bottom ring, promoting that. What's your view on that?
Well, I think that we would say NICVA's position has been that improving skill levels is absolutely critical, and that we need, we would agree, again with the Deputy Minister, that we need a target in terms of foreign direct investment jobs that are going to be of a higher quality. Therefore, we need to constantly increase the skill levels. I think that's the way in the world, that's the competitive market, that Northern Ireland is in. I think that is absolutely critical. We also, I think, have to think about, and I've had this conversation, with Arlene Foster when she became Minister at the start of the economic downturn. We can't just leave a large number of people who have low skills or no skills and go, sorry, we're not going to focus on you. So we do have to think about employment there as well. I certainly believe that if we can increase the skills level and we can increase the quality of work that comes into Northern Ireland, it will also help to lift up the employment prospects of people who are lower skilled or less skilled. But certainly would agree with you, we need to focus very strongly on skills and continuous improvement.
Can I add as well, that's a vital part of the solution, but there's no guarantee that productivity improvements translate to higher wage levels. And in fact, one of the reasons why there's been an interest in the living wage is that having previously grown in tandem, productivity increases and wage levels have been decoupled over the last number of decades. So that is absolutely vital to promote skills. But even if you look at somewhere like GB, where productivity rates are much higher, there's still very high levels of living wage. So I think it's only part of the solution.
Okay, Bronwyn.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. And I think this is a very important debate, and I welcome your report. And I do support the whole about the living wage. I'm a member of a regeneration partnership in Dungannon. I'm also a board member of Dungannon Enterprise Centre, and we have regular conversations about how we grow the economy, and which obviously is supporting and growing your local businesses. I wouldn't necessarily equate that if you increase the wage, that would increase profits. If I were to have that conversation with retailers, they would go down my throat, and what they would say is what we need to do is to increase footfall coming into the local towns, which would involve wider strategies looking at tourism, looking at initiatives, looking at promotions and so on and so forth. And what would make us different from maybe the neighbouring town of maybe Cookstown or Oma. You know, that's the regular conversations that we would have. Another issue would be, for example, Land and Property Services has identified like something like 1,000 vacant properties within a district. If you had people living in those properties, that would be people coming into the town to create footfall, increasing profits, thereby maybe increasing wages. So I think there's a much bigger picture here. What I would encourage you to do is to send that report around to enterprise centres who would always be looking at having those conversations. I'll certainly be bringing this report here to my own enterprise centre and to the Regeneration Partnership to start that debate. I know it has started in councils as well, so I would encourage you to have those engagements, because I do think this is a very important area of work. And like Pat, I do get lobbied by domiciliary care workers, classroom assistants about an increase in wages. And you know, so and I would just support that.
Thank you.
Can I just make just one or two minor points? Just on a general point, in terms of the GVA uplift in the Northern Ireland economy, and indeed the wage bill. I think just in terms of context, and I think I forgot to mention this at the start, the increase in the wage bill would actually be less than 1% of Northern Ireland's entire wage bill, and the increase in GDP overall would be less than 1% as well. So I think it's important just to note that it is a relatively modest increase. So yeah, I wouldn't foresee mountains of profits coming into your retailers because of a living wage minimum in this 2012 scenario. And then just on the footfall aspect, I think these are linked as well, because as you increase people's wages, their disposable income increases, and assuming they consume the same proportions, retailers will experience an uplift in trade. So in a sense, the productivity scenario is talking about raising the supply of the economy. More wages in the economy will ultimately increase demand as well, so it could create that increased footfall. But it's just a minor point. I just wanted to highlight that. It's nothing more.
Okay, thanks. Frau?
Sure. And again, much has been said already, but thanks for the presentation. And I think, if anything, hopefully this is the real start of the debate and around where we can bring this to. And I know David Cameron may have said that he's interested, they're concerned about the living wage. There's a big difference between concerned about it and putting it into legislation for people. See, and you mentioned something that was in there in the minimum wage, you know, the predictions at the time would have cost hundreds of thousands of jobs right across the board, and it never materialised. And no doubt you have the same debate and argument that goes on. Even when you talked about minor changes to the employment law, there was predictions coming from employers that it would cost thousands of jobs and cost a fortune to the local economy. There's that, and there's the right thing to do, and is to pay people a decent wage when they're in it. Belfast City Council took that step, you know, and it's hard to believe it in the council that says that there were still people earning below the living wage, you know, and at a cost of £56,000 a year. Hopefully that has been put right, and people need to follow that. So it's where you take the debate from here, how you influence that debate, and because once it goes out there, you will have people lining up to say this is going to cost. This is going to cost jobs. The cost this is prohibitive, and even what Anna said. Yes, we have a responsibility to ensure that if people want to skill themselves up, But remember, there are a whole range of people that below that work hard on a daily basis, that are skilled in the jobs that they do, and may not want to go into that. And we have a responsibility to those also. Besides the people who have a skilled waste, and wish as well.
I think those are important. Those are important points, Fra, and it is possible. I mean, obviously, we could all agree that the living wage is desirable, and then do absolutely nothing about, trying to make that a reality. That would be the easy thing to do. We recognise as well, if you take someone starting a small business, very difficult for them for the first few years. Cash flow incredibly difficult. Lots of them will go under, simply because they might be good, but they mightn't be able to, to manage the whole entry into the market and all of that. So with regard to this debate, I think you would look at that in great detail, and even if you could, you wouldn't just decree everyone would have to make the living wage. There's lots of things that you could do. In terms of size and scale of organisations, exemptions that you could give for start-up. There's lots of things that you could do that could move this along and create the living wage much more being the norm, and increasing the number of employers who actually pay it. But you wouldn't have to just go blanket to begin with, because you recognise all the difficulties that do exist.
Sure, and it's just one more point on it. And it was mentioned, I think I mentioned it there, and it's the whole question of the working poor and the dependency of the working poor on benefits to bring them up to a level of a wage that they survive. And even in the whole debate in and around welfare reform, that's a whole section that was lost somewhere down the line, and where people clued into benefit street and they clued into all them. And it distorted the whole argument about it. And what it's about is trying to create a fair and equal society where people don't have to be classed as a working poor, where they can earn a decent wage to provide for their families. That's my soapbox one over for.
You're on the right. Claire?
At age 15, I was working as a waitress, not in a cocktail bar, but I was getting paid £3 an hour. And I worked very hard, let's just say it, every Saturday night, Sunday night, and that was ridiculous. I would imagine that happens. We had the Commissioner for Older People in here talking about ageism. Well, that's age discrimination at the other end of the scale. So I do very much certainly subscribe to living wage. However, speaking with local businesses about it, I suppose what they always say to me is, well, we need to, in a sense, take care of our bottom line, and how do we do that? So I suppose they're grappling with a whole lot of other factors and hurdles so that they can ensure they can keep surviving, and particularly the constituency I represent, it is quite difficult for small businesses to actually survive, let alone to increase wages. I think some people would even suggest they're lucky to even have a job. Now, I don't necessarily subscribe to that view, and I think more can be done, but I think how do we support those businesses? It's very easy to say that, but when they're looking to see if they can even meet their overheads and keep on the current staff they have, it's not an option for some of them to actually look at increasing wages.
Yeah, as I say, that's why I do think there's a lot more needs to be done on this issue, and looking at a strategy for the development of the living wage. Because as I say, you got to be very clear in trying to do something that we think is desirable and good. The last thing that you want to do is harm. The last thing that you want to do is put people out of business and lose jobs. So I would definitely like to see the productivity gains, but I wouldn't find it desirable just to to make them at the expense of the numbers of people who are in employment. So therefore, being careful about how we would consider and advance this policy would become very important. Which is why, at this point, the whole discussion around the living wage has been voluntary and is focused on those who can afford to pay it.
And just through the chair as well, someone once says to me, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. I'm not sure if I entirely subscribe to that, because I think there's more to it than that. But I suppose particularly in labour-intensive jobs, where really the aim is just to actually earn money to be able to survive. I think sometimes we almost forget what the aim of the business is. Whilst I was a great worker, and I'll give myself that compliment, I was 10 a penny. And they were just looking at their bottom line, and it was easy to do that, and I think that's what we do across all sort of jobs and sectors. We look at the bottom line, so that's the easiest ones to chop, but that's another discussion for another day.
Okay, thanks, Claire.
Thank you.
Seamus, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks.
Seamus, I just had, before you, any update, the last time we met, although it wasn't fun, we were going to meet the Minister in regard to the ASF fund. I don't want to put you in the spot, but have you any more joy to...
Yeah, we met the Minister on ASF and had a very useful meeting with him. Obviously, on account of the whole talks process and all of that, we didn't get the meeting until the first week of January, and therefore it was almost, it was near the closing date in terms of applications, so not much could be done there. But we've certainly, the concerns that we were raising with the Minister, and some of them were on qualification levels of tutors and things like that. I know that some members here kindly raised some of those questions with them as well. And we've got some movement on that, and we've also got the Minister agreeing to look at what he couldn't change, in terms of the process, looking at monitoring that to see if there's any adverse consequences in terms of the issues that we're raising, and making adjustments as the programme goes on. So we had a very useful meeting with the Minister on foot of that.
Okay, thanks.
Sure, see, just on that, because I think it's
I wasn't going to open up for that.
you opened the door. But again, along with that, because there has been many dire predictions on the impact it'll have on employment within many of the groups that are going to be affected by this. And I think one of the things that certainly at social development I've been saying is that one job loss could cost a programme. And I think, have you been able to work out if there is no change to the thing, the impact that will have on employment and the knock-on effect that it will have on communities?
Yeah, I mean, fully can't answer your question there, Fra. I mean, obviously there's a competitive process that is now in place, and in my view there'll clearly be winners and losers. There'd be a general view that in our sector in particular it will be squeezed. So therefore we are likely to certainly lose jobs, lose projects, and and some of them will not win, and some of them might not be viable afterwards. So it will definitely have an impact. There's no question or doubt about that.
Seamus, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, members, moving on. Agenda item 9 is a briefing from Assembly Research into self-employment in Northern Ireland. It's page 114 of your pack, and just welcome Owen to the table.
Thank you. This briefing provides a discussion of some of the major features of self-employment in Northern Ireland and should take around 10 minutes. I'll start by discussing the broader situation in the UK and will then focus in on Northern Ireland. If the committee has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end of the briefing. The UK labour market is currently undergoing a resurgence, with the ONS reporting in 2014 that employment was 1.1 million higher in the second quarter of 2014 than in the first quarter of 2008. However, of this increase, 732,000 was among people who are self-employed, putting the total number of self-employed people in the UK at 4.6 million, and this equates to about 15% of all workers. Indeed, almost every region in the UK has seen an increase in the number of people in self-employment. In addition to this, the ONS has found that self-employment is higher than at any other point in the last 40 years. The most common roles in the UK are working in construction, taxi driving, and recently there have been also increases in management consultants. Across the European Union, the UK has the third largest percentage rise in self-employment since 2009, but also the average income from self-employment has fallen by 22% since 2008-9. This growth in self-employment is against an international backdrop of a fall. The Resolution Foundation states that the UK was one of only a handful of developed economies in which self-employment as a share of total employment rose from 2000 to 2011, growing by 8% across the period, while the OECD and EU27 averages both fell by 9%. The ONS found that the rise in self-employment is predominantly down to fewer people leaving this form of employment than in the past. The Resolution Foundation, however, found that in addition to fewer people leaving self-employment, additional issues such as structural factors, with the workforce itself having grown in size, and a recession acting as a push factor, creating high levels of unemployment and lower vacancy rates, encouraging people into self-employment, have all contributed to the increase. The Resolution Foundation has stated that While we are unlikely to continue to see increases on the scale of the post-recession periods in coming years, it is reasonable to assume that high levels of self-employment within the workforce are here to stay. The situation in Northern Ireland, however, is somewhat different to the rest of the UK. Employment here has also grown over the last number of years, with the workforce now larger than it was pre-recession. In August to October 2014, 68.3% of those aged 16 to 64 were in employment, which is a return to the pre-recession levels in percentage terms. Self-employment in Northern Ireland, however, has seen a much higher degree of fluctuation, and this can be seen in Table 2 and Figure 1 on page 114 of the committee's pack. In the 10 years of data presented, Northern Ireland has had a peak of self-employment in August to October 2010 of 127,000 people and a low in 2012 of 103,000. In August to October 2014, self-employment had returned to 118,000. When comparing Northern Ireland's self-employment rate with that of the other UK regions using annual population survey data in Figure 2, this fluctuation can be clearly seen against the somewhat more stable figures for the other UK regions. England has had a steady rise in self-employment, which is mirrored closely by the UK as a whole. Wales and Scotland has also had some increases in their level of self-employment throughout the data series. However, Scotland has had a percentage fall in its self-employment from 2011 to 2012, and Wales has a slight fall between 2012-13 and 2013-14, but that's only about 0.1%. Whilst there appears to be a fall in self-employment in these areas as a percentage of overall employment levels, the number of self-employed people in these areas has actually increased as the workforce has gone up, so more people have actually entered into self-employment. The Resolution Foundation found that for the UK, almost 30% of the growth in self-employment is a result of the raising of the retirement age, longer life expectancy and low levels of pension savings, resulting in people staying in work longer. It goes on to state that because self-employed people tend to be older than employees, this disproportionately affects this group. Self-employment might be growing as an alternative or complement to retirement rather than as an alternative to being an employee. For Northern Ireland, there is an increase in the number of people aged over 50 who are in employment. Indeed, whilst employment has fallen slightly for 18 to 24-year-olds since 2007, it's relatively stable, albeit with some fluctuation for the 25 to 49 age group. The 50 to 64 age group has had an increase in employment from 157,000 in 2007 to 206,000 in 2014. However, it has not been possible to identify if this increase in employment is in employees or within the self-employed. Nor does the increase reflect the fluctuations within Northern Ireland self-employment figures. In terms of the occupations of self-employed people in Northern Ireland, the largest single group is skilled trades, with 43% of the self-employed working in this sector. In 2010-11, there was a spike in self-employment amongst managers and directors, professional occupations and process plant and machine operators. For example, managers directors has an increase of 7,200 people in comparison with the same period in the previous year, which is an increase of over 50% of the previous year's figures. This trend is replicated in other UK regions. The ONS found that this spike may be a result of people managing their businesses and therefore identifying themselves as being in a managerial role. In terms of the sectors in which self-employed people work, construction is the largest at 25,000, with agriculture and fishing a close second. Manufacturing has the lowest level at 6,700, or 5.81% of all self-employed. Figure 4 on page 123 of the pack provides a longer-term view of the concentration of self-employment within each of the standard industrial classifications. As can be seen, agriculture and fishing has the highest concentration of self-employed workers, and that's at 84.3% of people in the industry being self-employed in 2008 to 2009, although this has recently seen a fall in the following years, with an upturn beginning in 2012-13. The construction sector has the most self-employed people, although not the highest percentage of self-employment. Of note is the peak in self-employment across 7 of the 9 industrial sectors in the latter half of the data series, including in construction, manufacturing and banking, finance and insurance. The briefing paper also considers the gender breakdown within self-employment. Labour force data identifies that the majority of the self-employed are men. In August to October 2014, 77.9% of the self-employed were male. This equates to 22,000 women out of the 118,000 self-employed, which is around 22%. Northern Ireland's figures for female self-employment are lower than the average of Great Britain, which sits at 32%. The impact of high levels of self-employment can be varied. On an individual basis, advantages such as being independent and in control of business decisions must be weighed up against constraints such as financial insecurity, as can be seen with a fall in income for the self-employed in recent years. It should be noted that it has not been possible to discuss income for the self-employed in Northern Ireland, as the annual survey of annual hourly earnings, which is the main source of information on pay in Northern Ireland and the UK, does not include self-employed workers within its data set. The Resolution Foundation also identifies that only 30% of self-employed people have a pension, as opposed to 52% of employees. For Northern Ireland, only 26% of the self-employed contributed to a pension in 2014. On a macroeconomic level, high levels of self-employment works to reduce unemployment, as can be seen in the UK's current employment figures, in which of the 1.1 million increase in employment since 2008, 732,000 people were entering into self-employment. Blanche Farr, a researcher, argues that governments frequently see self-employment as a route out of poverty and disadvantage, and for this reason offer aid and assistance for small businesses. The justification for these actions are usually that it is argued that self-employment will help promote invention and innovation and thus create new jobs. New firms may also raise the degree of competition in the product market, bringing gains to consumers. Greater self-employment may also go along with the increased self-reliance and well-being. Unfortunately, economists have little evidence on whether these hypothetical benefits exist in practice. It has not been possible with the information available to identify why Northern Ireland has a high degree of fluctuation in self-employment figures, and the committee may wish to ask the Department if it's aware of any research or has carried it out in those areas. And if the committee has any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them.
Thanks, Owen. Owen, you give a number of reasons why there's thought of people going self-employed. Managing directors, is there any indication that there's a potential to go self-employed because of tax loopholes or other financial opportunities of being self-employed rather than being an employee?
That's I actually have a quote. Part of what they're saying when they're managing directors is that somebody could be working in skilled trades, but because they're managing their own business, they'll put themselves down as a manager. So it could just be that that's part of the reason. I'll read a quote that I actually kept in, and it's from NAMAS about the annual survey of hourly earnings. It sort of relates. It says, "It is also worth noting that self-employed workers are not included in the ASH data set. This is an important effect. With regards to the public sector, ASH captures most of the highest paid workers. However, in the private sector, many highly paid workers are self-employed, for example, lawyers, businessmen and entrepreneurs. This means that the ASH estimate of average pay does not include many of the highest earners in the private sector, whereas a large proportion of the highest earners in the public sector will be included in the ASH data set." So potentially there are benefits there with going self-employed whenever you're a very high earner, that you're working for yourself and you're producing your own thing, but you're not paying corporate taxes and stuff like that. But yes, potentially there's an area within there, but because there's no data for self-employed workers in terms of their wages within the ASH survey, you can't tell.
You can't tell. In regard then to the other scale, the other end of the scale, sorry, when it's the lower paid workers here potentially forced to be self-employed,
subcontractors
and that to protect the employers from their responsibilities. Is there any indications of that in your research, or is that? I know you mentioned certain trades like taxi drivers, and
there'll be anecdotal evidence that people are being encouraged to go subcontract, and then they get the employment, because you're cutting down things like national insurance contributions for the employers. There's other areas within that figure that shows the fluctuation within it. Because there's no real data around that, it's hard to say. There's other areas that could be looked at that may be impacted within it, within areas such as your agency workers, in terms of how they're treated within that, because you have little things within that are coming up, such as umbrella groups, which are sort of, you start off as a temporary agency worker or an agency worker, and then you go into an umbrella group where you're almost managing yourself, but your wages are being paid out and there's cuts. So there's a whole level of factors within it that may be impacting within there, but that there's nothing. Well, because this is a broad look, I'm looking at self-employment. There's other factors maybe contributing within that.
Okay, thanks. Anna?
Thank you, Chair. You said about aid and assistance for people who are self-employed. I was at a function of the organised by the Women in Business, with all the participants or attendees were women, and there was a lot of criticism about Invest NI. who seemed to be only interested, according to these participants, only interested in SMEs being able to export. They were saying they don't want to export. They know there is a market within Northern Ireland. But if you're saying you don't want to expand your business to exporting products, then there wasn't a lot of help. What do you think about that?
As far as I'm aware, previously I had a role to play in its main function was SMEs and getting them to export internationally. As far as I'm aware, more recently they've been given a broader role in terms of supporting everybody within the Northern Ireland economy. But I know that the local enterprise agencies would have a larger role in supporting self-employed people and getting them set up and providing support for them. So there's almost like a filtering down system. But in terms of the overall role of INI in supporting small business, I wouldn't be fully aware of it, but I can certainly look into it for you and see if there's anything there.
Okay, thank you. Tom?
Yeah, from your research, Owen, have you seen where it is likely that self-employment will continue to increase? And one of the things that used to always be a problem for self-employed people was bureaucracy, compared to being employed, where they were an employee, they hadn't got a whole lot of things to worry about, whereas they're self-employed, they did have like insurance costs and a lot of other costs associated with it, and a lot of other bureaucracy and all. Did you see anything like that within your research that seems to stand out to be a hindrance or anything to people becoming self-employed?
Well, it could be a factor, but within the UK there's a general trend up, and it's across all the regions apart from Northern Ireland where there's been this large increase. So it would, and as I was saying in the paper, that could be a result of people staying within self-employment rather than retiring, as the Commissioner was talking about previously, about people who are over the age of 50, they're more likely to become self-employed. In terms of, so there could be a factor there. In terms of bureaucracy, if you are a single, you're running your own business, there are things such as filling out forms, public liability insurance could be an additional factor in slowing the expansion of your business. In terms of Northern Ireland, if it's impacting on the growth within Northern Ireland of self-employment, again, I'm not aware of anything that came up during it, but then I was looking at the labour market end of it, not the kind of business end, but I can certainly take a look and see if there is additional factors there. I know that within that DWP did a study, I think last year or the year before, around environment protection legislation and bureaucracy, red tape around small businesses. What they found was that there was a perception of red tape slowing down processes. That was partially caused that whenever people come to making redundancies or to making changes within their business or applying for additional things, they've never done it before. So it's a brand new process for them to go through, so it's a lot slower for them to do. And then as they gain experience about it, it becomes less of a burden, but there's still a factor there potentially that's taking them away from doing the actual work that they have intended to do as setting up the business, but there may be factors there within it.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Thank you very much. Anna, do you go?
Yeah.
Members, just are you content that Owen's, I suppose, in his paper has asked that we maybe pass this on to the department to see if it's carried out any issue into any research or into this issue continue to do? Okay, Owen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Members, under any other business, I did say I would come back to it as our committee's visit to Manchester in regard to our inquiry into post-special educational needs. Tabled at page 3 is the agenda, leaving the 11th of March. The visits to the Seashell Trust, Pure Innovations, and on Thursday the 12th is Manchester City Council and possibilities. Members do need an indication as who will be attending at this minute in time. Who has indicated they're going?
Anna Lowe, Pat Ramsey, Robin Swan,
And Fra.
and Fra. Anna's
David.
going for one. David.
David. Oh, yeah. Do you know if
I know William said no last week,
Right.
Sydney has said no, and Claire has
said no? So, Anna?
Chair, I can only go for the day.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I've been given some timetable for coming back. I mean, is a daily flight to come back? We've been given, kind of time to fly back on the Thursday. Is it the same for Wednesday?
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
the same time flights.
Yes.
So, okay. So if I can even leave, say, about 4:30 to get then there's
18:40.
one at
Yep.
kind of 6:40 or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
So if that's okay.
We'll organise that for you.
And it's easy enough to just get a taxi
Yeah, we'll
from the
organise it.
place to go to the
Yeah.
airport, and it's a city airport.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So if that can be arranged for me.
Yeah.
My staff would
Sure.
liaise with you, Cathy. Yeah.
Okay, members, so that the the agenda has been tabled there at the minute. It's an indicative itinerary of the visit, just depending on all organisations
I'm
confirming.
going to say the flight's out 8:30.
Yep, flight on Wednesday the 8th will be 8:30.
Wednesday the 11th.
Wednesday the 11th, sorry, departing Belfast City at 8:30 a.m. on Wednesday the 11th, and coming back then Thursday the 12th. We'll arrive back at 7:35.
Chair, are we all just going to the airport ourselves, or is it going to be a taxi to bring us from Stormont
No,
there?
I'll organise transport for you. I'll speak to you all individually.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, members. Members, any other business? Pat?
Yeah, I'll try and be brief as I can. We did have before Christmas some informal meetings with the governors and the principal of North West College. We also then met with some trade union groupings in respect of the North West College, and we were then to have sort of an informed debate around that. There clearly is some issues, tensions, problems, legacy matters that need to be resolved, and we're hearing constantly, as we heard from meetings, that the college seems to be in denial even of the McConnell report. So I think we need to be writing to the Minister again, seeking information over further intervention, possibly of the Labour Relations Agency, to try and create an environment where a lot of these matters are being resolved. They're not being resolved. Chair, you do recall a meeting, I think Fra was at it as well. The tensions are there, the problems are there, particularly at the present time when the colleges are under so much stress. We want to be in a place where we're promoting the positivity in the colleges, not the negativity that we're forced to have to deal with.
Okay, Fra?
Sure, and as I say, the day that we done the visit to the college, I thought peace had broke out in the college, and that seemed to be a general idea, and I have no difficulty or problem with the vision that was presented to us on that day, but from that there does seem to be some underlying difficulties and problems, and I think a lot of it may stem in around the implementation of the McConnell report itself, and there's a to and fro on what has been implemented. But could there be a suggestion, and given that McConnell seemed to be the bridge between both, is there a possibility that McConnell could be called back in again to look at what has been implemented, what hasn't been implemented, and if the problem still exists?
Don, do you want to?
I'm happy enough
I suppose, remember, we did take the informal briefings, and we would take it away forward. I'd be honest with you, I'm nervous about us writing to the Minister to ask him to involve LRA straight away. Maybe if we were to write to the Minister to see if he'd be willing to engage,
probably,
without going to the full state of recommendation, and then maybe Fra's, involving McConnell again to see.
I'm content, as long as we're asking the Minister to look at it again at the committee, we have to reflect on what was said to us. If he would intervene, that's the language you want. If he would have a look at it again, because it's still,
First and see what he's doing in case he-
Yeah, well, I think the problem is where I can see it from anyway is the fact that they are saying McConnell hasn't been implemented. Well, maybe they didn't like McConnell from the beginning. They're still saying, right, but McConnell made recommendations. They're not been fully implemented and that type of stuff. And maybe that's what we do need to be seeing if the implementing of McConnell in full, as the recommendations were put out, is something that's going to resolve this thing once and for all, then, and that's not been done, well then we need somebody to look at it and see, well, why has McConnell not been implemented in full as recommended, and can that be done?
and if it means McConnell again, so be it.
Members content we go down, ask the Minister for an update as to where he is. see what steps we take from there.
Because the difficulty is, they'll say they'll send along a change minister. It's wasting our time.
We've done what we've done,
wasting our time.
there's not getting any answers. That we need another process. Okay, members, any other business? If not, date, time and place, next meeting, 10 a.m, room 29, Wednesday the 28th of January. Members' meetings adjourned.
Do you want these back?
29. This is the